Welcome to Ask an Apologist. My name is Matthew Mittelberg. I'm joined tonight by Mike Sherrard and Alycia Wood. And tonight we are talking about the question, what makes the Bible trustworthy? And this is a big topic, a big question. So we're going to have a lot to talk about, a lot of different topics. But we don't want to just talk about our questions. We want to talk about your questions. So if you are watching tonight, whether you're on YouTube, I'm getting some feedback there. I don't know. No?
No,
No.
we don't. I don't hear it.
Yeah, you sound good to
Okay,
me.
great. I'll take out my headphones for a second here. Just to say, yeah, we're looking forward to having you guys a part of this. So ask your questions, whether you're on the YouTube or on Twitter or X or Facebook, wherever you're watching this. Feel free to put your questions in the comments, and we will do our best to answer those. So do you guys have anything that you want to say as we get started to address this question?
Happy New Year. I'm glad you survived your ailments, Matthew. Hopefully you can make it for the entire night tonight.
Yeah. I've been a little bit out of it with pneumonia in the past couple months here, so I'm grateful to be back and up and running for the most part here, which is great.
And you're surviving the snowpocalypse in Atlanta, Alycia, like we are down here.
Oh, surviving and loving. Like I was out of town when we had I don't know, was it 5 inches? And I was so mad. I could not get back. I tried so hard to get back. They shut down the Atlanta airport. It was on a ground stop. And I was just pouting for 24 hours because I was missing all the fun. So it snowed a couple days ago and I was here and saw it and was very happy. I like the snow.
We'll go a decade here in Atlanta and not get the kind of snow we've gotten twice in 2 weeks or a week and a half?
Yeah. It's pretty
Our kids
unusual.
have been out of school all week.
Oh, I didn't know they
Of
closed
course,
it the whole week.
Monday was MLK, but then they closed school on Tuesday because it was going to be really cold in the morning. But by 3:00 that day, we got 1 to 2 inches of snow. So it's kind of good they did close snow because there's no way those kids would have gotten home. And then they canceled it for Wednesday and then again today.
Wow.
Yes. So the kids are loving this, man.
Oh, there you are. First of all, a lot of the cancellations, there's a lot of ice going on. There's some rain and stuff is turning to ice. But I tell you, being a good old northerner that I am, I just feel bad for a lot of the kids in Atlanta who don't get to experience on a regular basis the exhilaration of a snow day. When it's for me, it'd be 6 a.m. and my mom would call me from work. She got to work really early. She'd call me, Alycia, turn off your alarm. School's canceled. And the exhilaration you feel
it's the best.
Because it's the best. You're from New Jersey. And in New York, this happened all the time and a couple times a year. And so you stay in your warm bed. It's dark, because it's still early in the morning and you're just goodbye world. It's such a great experience. So I'm so glad that they've had 3 snow days this week. Good for them. It's awesome.
So, Atlanta, the South, we get criticized, made fun of all the time because we close school when it gets really cold, below freezing, cancel school. And I do remember, going to school in Jersey where if you didn't bring your snow boots, you couldn't go out for recess, right? And it's
That's true. You'd bring snow boots for recess.
Now that I'm fully Southern, so in defense of my state, it's why would we spend the money to have any kind of infrastructure or support for an event that'll happen once a decade? No, we're just going to close school for the week and enjoy the 2 inches we get on one of those days.
That's so true. I forgot you'd wear boots and then you would change at school. I forgot about all of that. You're so right. I remember one time I came home. I must have been in middle school or maybe even high school. Came home from school. So we'd gone to school the whole day, came home, and the bus dropped me off in my driveway and I just stopped because the snow, I think, was up to my waist. And I'm like, how am I going to get through this? Or maybe it was up to my knees, whatever. It was high. I just remember I'd had to go through it and didn't have snow, but just go through it and get into your house. So it's great. It was fun. I like the snow.
Now, this has nothing to do with what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm sure there's some clever speaker or preacher way to make a segue, but I'll spare us anything that's cheesy or
I can't. Yeah, thank you, Mike. As the resident pastor here, we appreciate that.
President pastor.
He did you all a favor, trust me.
Yes. I said resident, but president pastor is even funnier. So
That's a
that's
weird
great.
title.
Yeah.
President
Uh,
Reverend.
yes. So yeah, let's dive into this question of what makes the Bible trustworthy, because I do think this is an important topic for Christians to think about, because if you are a Christian, then you believe what the Bible says, right? The Bible is our foundation of knowledge about God, of theology, of history of our faith, all sorts of things. And in order to know that Christianity is true, or even believe that it's true, you have to believe that the Bible can be trusted, right? Because if the Bible can't be trusted, why would you believe anything that it says? Why would you believe that Jesus is God? Why would you believe that he rose from the dead? All sorts of different things. So I do think that this question is very important for us to ask. And I think,
And what about Joe Rogan getting all interested in this? Did you guys
yes,
see the Joe Rogan podcast interview with Wes Huff, a New Testament
absolutely.
scholar out of Canada? I mean,
Yeah.
now Rogan had him on. I'm guessing, I don't have any insider information here. I've never met Wes, don't know him at all. I'm guessing he had him because Joe Rogan had Billy Carson on,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and Billy Carson is this. He puts himself out there as a scholar in ancient texts and things like that. And he and Wes Huff were in a friendly conversation. It wasn't like a formal debate or anything like that. And Carson was shown to be just really unprepared and unknowledgeable. And I think you could say he had been actively lying and deceiving and talking about things he had no business talking about. So Rogan, now aware of this video, and it's really just I don't know that I've ever seen anything like this, where a guy who puts himself forward as an expert, when
Yeah.
corrected with the facts by Wes Huff, there was no rebuttal. Like, I've never seen that. Like, somebody who can get on Joe Rogan talking about things like Jesus had a wife, offering references to this. And then he gets into a conversation with a New Testament scholar, and he has nothing to say back to Wes other than fair point. I mean, it's like, it's crazy. It's so wild.
Yeah.
So that,
Yeah.
something like that, when Rogan was made aware of it, you can see why Wes was brought on. But if you've watched it, I'm curious what you guys think about it, because we haven't talked about this. Rogan seemed thoroughly interested, captivated by it. And it was a captivating 3 hours, if I might say so myself. So what do you guys make of that? Am I overdoing this Rogan episode? Is this kind of like, I don't know, even emblematic? Is this signifying something happening bigger than Joe Rogan, like something happening here in the West? I don't know. What do you guys think about this?
No, I don't think you're wrong. I mean, I've seen a lot of people talking about kind of this is the kind of final straw that shows that the world is beginning to open up to spirituality in a way that it hasn't in the past 20 years. And 20 years ago there was 9/11, and there was sort of this push towards new atheism and sort of rejection of religion in general. And now it just seems like there's an openness to spirituality, but it's even specifically Christianity. And I'm not a Joe Rogan expert or longtime fan or anything, but I've seen people compile kind of clips of him over the years, where at the beginning he was just a kind of a comedian who's ridiculing Christianity and doesn't really know what he's talking about, but just kind of saying Christians are stupid and stuff. And then you gradually see him start to go, wow, actually, they've got a point about this. Or he had an interview with Riley Gaines last year where he said, it's weird how like the Bible just kind of seems scarily accurate when it just talks about like what happens when we don't live by God's ways. And, but even then he was like, I wonder what ancient text this originally came from, or, whatever. So for him to have Wes Huff, the director of Apologetics Canada, on to essentially just make the case for the reliability of Scripture was breathtaking. I mean, I was in the hospital with my pneumonia, and I wanted to get up and cheer and stuff. And
So
your
breath was already taken.
Yeah, my breath was already
for
taken
a different
away.
reason.
Exactly. Yes. So no, I was very encouraged by all of that.
So I actually had never even heard of Billy Carson
I hadn't
before
either.
this. For the whole Billy Carson Wes Huff thing. I cannot remember if I feel like Wes and I have met somewhere in Canada at some point. I just can't remember. But Wes I'd heard of, but it was Billy Carson that was new to me. And so I mean, I watched the whole. It was somebody brought it to my attention, so I watched the Billy Carson Wes Huff kind of conversation. But I wouldn't say I watch Joe Rogan regularly, but I have really come in the last, I would say probably, I don't know, maybe 2 months or so, to actually grow for an appreciation for him and actually like some stuff I'm listening to. I've heard, like, I think I've watched Joe Rogan in the past. He had Jordan Peterson on. I think I've watched when he's had certain people on. Maybe I've watched an episode or part of an episode here and there. It's hard to do a 3-hour thing, so I usually get snippets of things or watch parts of it. And then, of course, he had on President Trump and VP JD Vance and had invited Kamala. So, he's invited a range of people with different views and perspectives. And I think what I like about Joe Rogan is Joe Rogan just doesn't care what other people want him to do, what other people think he should do, or, having to cater to the crowd or the masses. Joe Rogan is going to do his thing. And the advantage he has is, I believe he's the largest podcast in the world. So he's at that point where when you're at that level, you can kind of do kind of your own thing, kind of like Elon Musk. He kind of just beats to his own drum. And that's kind of his thing. And I think what's good about Joe Rogan is actually, he's really seeking truth. He wants truth, whether it's truth about aliens, whether it's truth about God, whether it's truth about a social issue, a cultural issue. Joe Rogan is interested in truth. And so he will interview people that, you're not supposed to talk to them because they're anti this or anti that. Joe Rogan doesn't care. Like, you're not going to control him. And I appreciate that about him. And that he's got the platform to do it. And he does it well. And you can see that people want that. So it's interesting. I think Matthew just said that he had said something along the lines of, isn't it wild that the Bible seems to be accurate, and that to me is like, I've been thinking a lot the last couple of months. We're looking at this topic of the Bible today, and people want to say, ask me the question, prove to me, there's a God, or how do you know Christianity is true? Over the course of the last several years, I've moved away from, let me show you the Bible's accurate. Let me talk about resurrection. I almost like now think about it as it works. How is it always right? How does it always, when we veer off and do our own thing, how is it that we come back? We have to come back to it. So even on something like, and I'm not going to get too far off topic here, but just to just further emphasize why I think Joe Rogan is important in our conversation. You look at even something like, we have this whole like emasculation of men in our culture, and kind of showing, well, men really aren't, men are toxic, or masculinity isn't good, and all these kind of things. But then you look at all, or men, we don't need men for child rearing, and marriage really isn't that important. You can just raise kids without them. But then you look at all the studies that show counter, and the effects on children when there isn't a father in the home, and all these things. And you're like, wow, the biblical idea of marriage and then children actually does make sense. And so for me, I think Joe Rogan is willing to engage, even if it makes him uncomfortable or is outside of his box. I think that's good. Now, there's always a difference between, I like this, but will I follow this? And that's always the big step. And I don't, who knows where Joe Rogan is on his journey, but that's always the big step. This sounds great.
Well, and I like how, at the end of the interview, if you haven't seen it, at the end, he really, Wes really turns the corner and kind of brings to Joe the question, who do you say I am? Who do you say Jesus is, kind of a thing. And really, gets him to give some of his current opinions on it. And I think, like you say, he's in process. Like, we've seen kind of this change over the years. Remembering too, just he had Stephen Meyer on about a year ago or a year and a half
yes,
ago.
I watched that
3-hour
one.
discussion,
Yes,
which was amazing. Yeah, that's one of the only other episodes I've watched. But but it was fantastic, and you could just see just that curiosity, the questioning that he has there. So I love that. And I think I resonate too with the idea that there are different approaches to how do we demonstrate the truth of Christianity, and one of them showing sort of the judge the tree by its fruits kind of perspective
works.
Of
right.
It works, and like it doesn't prove that it's true, but like, why does it work? Why does it work so well?
Yeah, but
and
it is a compelling thing
Mhm.
to notice, and I think that's what we're seeing in some of these public intellectuals, or I don't know I don't even know if Joe Rogan would call himself a public intellectual, but you think of like Jordan Peterson, that that crowd and whatnot. They're noticing. And then some people that have recently converted, like why am I drawing a blank on her name?
Ian
Ian,
Lee.
yeah.
Yeah.
Who that's what kind of made them rethink their worldview was
Mm-hmm.
these other belief systems are not producing the kind of world I hope that they would produce. And it sparked in them an interest in Christianity, a curiosity. I got to check this out. Maybe it's it, because of the recognition of what the Christian worldview has produced
Mm-hmm.
over the last 2,000 years in the Western world and beyond. And of course, Christianity is growing really fast in the non-Western world right now, but the flourishing of the Western civilizations, most people recognize, scholars included, that this is owed to the Christian faith. So I'm curious to see where this all goes, right?
Well, and
I just
yeah, and it's not only Joe Rogan, but it's, like you say, Jordan Peterson, I think even this week said, I think Jesus is God, essentially. And it's like, you never quite can
what do you
tell
mean
what he
by
means
God?
when he says, yeah,
Right.
because it's
Yeah.
like he kind of uses the same words, but a different dictionary to say everything. But there's that. I mean, Lee Strobel was on Sean Ryan, which is the second biggest podcast in the world, just a couple weeks ago as well, which was fantastic, talking about the case for Christ and all sorts of different things. So there is just kind of this movement towards, I think, openness and embracing of sort of just the reasonableness of Christianity, if not the truth of it, at least. So, and yet, then, go ahead.
Nope, go for it.
I was just going to say, and yet, then there are the people like Billy Carson who are out there saying, well, Jesus actually wasn't crucified in the Sinai Bible, and the Sinai Bible's earlier than all the other gospel or all the other Bibles, and so it's been changed over time. And it's like, okay, what do we do with that? And I think I think the West did a fantastic job on that interview, that debate, where he goes like, well, actually, I'm a Bible scholar, and here's the Sinai Bible, which is Codex Sinaiticus, and it's from the 4th century, and it does have the crucifixion. And like you said, Billy had nothing to say to that. But I guess what would we say to kind of the larger question and claim that the Bible has been changed over time? How would we sort of respond to that question?
Yeah, well, one, it's just you got to have a basic awareness of some facts, and you don't have to be a Wes Huff, because a lot of this stuff is well documented and published, and you can find it. And here I sound like I'm advocating for laziness and just let AI think for you, but but this kind of stuff is pretty technical, and those that study this, professionally, like Wes, they can recall this stuff instantaneously. And I don't think that's the goal for the average Christian, is needing to be able to recall this, but just a general awareness that the Bible that we have today is basically put together by thousands of manuscripts that exist. Now, original copies of the Old Testament writings and the New Testament writings don't exist, but what we do have are copies. Some of these copies date back to as early as the 2nd century. And the fact that we have so many copies through a discipline called textual criticism, you can examine the different copies and see where they're the same and where they are different. And through that process, with a high degree of certainty, biblical scholars would say as high as 99% certainty, you can have that kind of, you can have a 99% certainty that what we have today is the same as what was written then. And of those differences, less than that 1% that I even stated there are what you would call meaningful or viable, and no essential Christian doctrine is changed or affected. And even skeptical New Testament scholar Bart Ehrman, who's not a Christian, would agree that the variance that we have, and a variant is just whenever there's a difference and you're not sure what that difference is. Like, this is spelled this word is different, misspelling or whatever, and you can't have 100% certainty what the original said. Even Ehrman would say none of those change any essential Christian doctrine. So to me, it's really one of these settled issues where if you're taking someone like Ehrman, who's like, now we can have a pretty high confidence that what we have today is what was written back then. Now Ehrman will challenge the originality of some of them. He'll say some of them were forgeries or whatnot. But I think Ehrman's been rebuffed a number of times. Mike Lacona is a good source on that. So I think part of it is just having a general awareness. Like a lot of Christians are just, it's so in the dark. They're like, what we have today, how can you trust it when there's so many different translations and things like that? It's like, well, wait a second. We still have manuscripts that were written in the original language. We have a ton of them. So, and we have people that can still read Hebrew and Greek, by the way. And so you can compare these manuscripts, and with a high degree of certainty, by identifying where they're the same and where they're different, we can have a high degree of certainty what the originals actually said. It's kind of a layman's way to get into it.
That was a great summary, Mike, because I think it just kind of having the mental picture of like all of these manuscripts and all of these Bibles being written, these letters were circulating, they're being sent out, they're being copied and sent out, and just the idea of it being changed is almost like somebody trying to change Harry Potter today or something like that, and you try to go out and you try to change your copy or something like that. What's that going to accomplish? It's all it's going to show is that you changed your copy, but there's too many copies out there, right? There's too many of them. They're out there. They're and we can see the publication date on there, or we can see how old the pages are and how old the artwork is to see like, oh, this is an older one, and it it doesn't have these pages ripped out of it, and so we can know that that's the one. So I think it's the same thing with the Bible, where and it's remarkable because, like you say, we don't have the originals, but we don't have the originals for any ancient historical document. But for most ancient historical documents, we have 6 copies or 7 copies or very, very small amounts. I think,
or in the hundreds for something like the Homeric writings,
the
Odyssey and the Iliad, and those are like in second place compared to the New Testament manuscripts, right, which are just the Greek ones are nearly 6,000 of them. Just the Greek, not considering other languages. So it's crazy.
Yeah. And I think I was going to say, I heard, what was it? Beowulf. I think we only have 1 copy of
it. Yep.
And so we're like, well, we hope this is the story. We don't really know, but even that.
Yeah. So a lot of times you'll hear things like, you can't trust the Bible because of something like the telephone game. And that's just not the way that the word of God or the writings were circulated. It wasn't a 1-to-1 to 1-to-1 to 1 kind of thing. It was more like a shotgun kind of thing that happened. And stories spread, the letters were copied, and there was a community that was growing and forming that was aware of all of this. So even in that early community, discrepancies were easy to find out. No, that is not in line with the teachings of Jesus. That's why we reject that book. No, this isn't something that was written by a close associate of Jesus, somebody he commissioned, or one of their close friends. That's why we don't accept that. And so the formation of the New Testament canon and the Old Testament canon was already existing by the time that Jesus was alive, and Jesus recognized all of the books that we now consider the Old Testament. He recognized them as scripture. And so if the New Testament is accurate in recording what Jesus had to say about the Old Testament, if the New Testament is accurate, it's almost like you get the Old Testament right with it, unless you just don't want to trust Jesus. So all of this happened in a community out in the light. It wasn't like, sometimes it's said that like nobody knew this. It was hidden. It was secretive. It was this council of 5 people behind closed doors, and they were the ones that decided it. That's just not what happened. This was all done in a communal kind of setting, in an oral culture where the tradition of Jesus followers and the teaching and the doctrine that they ascribed to was forming even before the letters were canonized. So you almost had this body of people that had already dedicated and committed themselves to the life and the teaching of Jesus. When these letters that we now, call scripture were coming along, they recognized them as, this is Holy Scripture. This is very much in line with the teaching and the message we've already heard. And it's coming from somebody that was either directly commissioned by Jesus or one of their close associates. So I'm just kind of getting carried away here. But the formation of the New Testament, to me, is one of the greatest things about Christianity, because it's so public. And there really isn't, and the more you get into this, the more you said it, there really is no reason to have a lack of confidence that the Bible that we have today, this thing we consider Holy Scripture, that it is the same as what the people following Jesus in the early centuries were reading and holding to themselves?
I think also, you know, when you look at the text and you look at how it talks about names of cities, you know, and it talks about names of rulers. You know, Pontius Pilate, we didn't even know if he existed until we started discovering things later on, because he actually wasn't written about outside the biblical text. And then, you know, as we discovered things later on, we discovered, oh yeah, Pontius Pilate really was the guy at the time. You know, so it's stuff like that. Like, you know, it gets it actually, it's historically accurate, which I think is really important as well. But I also think that there's
And
a good
about
amount of
incidental things, like things you wouldn't make up
mhm,
unless it were true, and things that you couldn't be aware of unless you lived in that time. Like
sure.
certain names, right? Like there over time, certain names become more popular. And if you're writing this later, you know, and you're just fabricating certain details, those kind of incidental details that aren't central to the story, but you have to have it there. You have to have geography, you have to have a person's name, you have to have some custom or whatever. They're incidental, they're not the main, but you have to have them. This is one of the another ways you just get a lot of credit. The Bible gets a lot of credit because it gets them all. It's like historians have shown, yeah, those are all accurate, and there's no way you
Mhm.
could know that unless you lived then. And so it gets some
Right.
of those
Right.
just incidental details correct, if
Yeah.
you
Well,
will.
and just real quick, just to say that's really important because we know that these were eyewitnesses to the events that were writing these things down. These were not later followers of Jesus. They were not, people on another continent and another place trying to, make up these stories. No, these were the people that walked and talked with Jesus that
Mhm.
wrote the Gospels. And that if you want more information on that, Richard Bauckham has this book, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, where he goes into a lot of details. He's a scholar on these topics. Or Peter J. Williams has a great book called "Can We Trust the Gospels," which is a shorter
Mhm.
kind of read on that as well. But yeah, keep going, Alicia.
Yeah,
Well, I
sorry,
was
we
just gonna
both cut you off.
oh, that's okay. That's right. Because those are both great points as well. I think also what I like to look at is all their early writings. And when you look
Mm,
at early writings of other Christians, and there are tons of those, because they would write, and what they would write and stuff would get out, but what they would write was also consistent with what the biblical text says. So that shows that early on, people even at that time writing about Christianity are writing things that are consistent with what's inside of the text in terms of the teachings and those kind of things. But I also think it's worth mentioning the Dead Sea Scrolls here,
mm,
because I think the Dead Sea Scrolls was the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947 was a huge it really gave credibility to the Old Testament text, right? So we have the Masoretic text, which was, I don't remember what year that was, 500s, 1000, something like between 500 and 1000, I think, is when the Masoretes were writing. And so you have the Masoretes are writing their text, and they're adding in the vowels because there wasn't vowels in the original language. And that was the earliest, like, actual, like, physical copies that we had of the Old Testament. So when the Dead Sea Scrolls come along, and there's like 800 scrolls, and they've got Old Testament books, and they also have other stuff as well. It's not just all Bible, but they have all of the Old Testament books except for Esther, and they have the entire Isaiah scroll. And you can look at these scrolls, these Dead Sea Scrolls, written somewhere between 250 BC and 135 AD. So Jesus lived and died. I should say he died and rose somewhere around in the 30s AD. So these things are written between 250 and 135 AD. And when you have something like that we discovered that was so well preserved for nearly 2,000 years, or actually, yeah, 2,000 years, and it's actually showing, like, word for word what we actually have. It gives confirmation not just to the Masoretic text, because it lets us know that the Masoretic text, or those scribes did good, but also lets us know all the Bible that we're reading is actually accurate. And I remember I went to a Dead Sea Scroll exhibit once, and this is goodness, probably 15 years ago. And at the end of the exhibit, they had this massive, like, oval table of pieces of the scrolls. And one was, I remember going up to one, and I was looking at, and it was Psalms in English, and they had the Dead Sea Scroll next to it. And I can, of course, read the Dead Sea Scrolls, but there was a guy that was next to me that was able to read them, and so he's literally translating it from the language into English, and I'm reading along in the English as he's translating, and I can see that it was consistent. It was such a cool kind of experience. So I wouldn't, like, we have other things that have helped affirm to us that that even the Old Testament is credible, because the Dead Sea Scrolls predate by a lot, 1,000 years, the Masoretic scribes that gave us our written ones, because it was oral. There was so much oral before that.
Well, and even on those, it's cool to see, they're not exactly the same. Like there are minor differences, and there's but it's what I love too is, we as Christians, we don't believe that the text needs to be perfectly preserved. That's not the
Right.
doctrine of inerrancy. That's not what we believe as Christians. That is, interestingly, what Muslims believe about the Quran, that it's been
Right.
perfectly preserved, which is a big problem, because when you look at the history of it, there's been tons of changes over the years, and it's not been perfectly preserved. But as Christians, we don't believe that it's been perfectly preserved. We believe that the inspired word of God was perfect as it was given, and that it's been reliably preserved. And this is helpful, I think, just as a concept, because it lowers the bar from, we need to prove that everything is absolutely perfect the same way it was originally written, to, can we trust that what we're reading today is basically the same as what was originally written? And like you said earlier, Mike, we can trust that. I mean, we have a huge degree of confidence, partially because of the number of manuscripts that we have, and then, Alycia, what you're pointing out, how early those manuscripts go. Because if you have a huge time gap between when the thing was supposedly written and then our earliest copy, well, that has a lot of that lowers our degree of confidence that what we have is accurate to what was originally written. But when we go earlier and earlier and earlier, it gives us much more confidence to know that what we have today is what was originally written down. So I love that point about the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's awesome.
Yeah, and just to be clear, so like the Masoretic text, when they they took the texts that were around, but they were there was no vowels, like there was no accents, like it was just the pronunciations were oral, and so for them to just be able to insert the vowels so that we could actually preserve actual pronunciation going forward. So it wasn't even just the context; it was also preserving the pronunciation of stuff that they did, which is cool, because there's the manuscripts previously were just consonants. So it's just, there's so much great stuff here when you look at the Bible. There's a plethora of stuff that we actually are really spoiled when it comes to Bible credibility, let alone looking outside of the biblical text to Roman sources and Jewish sources that affirm Jesus' existence, his crucifixion, Pontius Pilate crucifying him. Like, you don't need the Bible to know those things. You can read that in other sources as well. So you've got these other sources that are not even religious and Christian based, that actually confirm essential things about who Jesus was.
Yeah, at the risk of just overstating our case here, I think the last 30 years, and it goes further than that, but the last 30 years, the amount of scholarship that has been directed towards what we're talking about tonight is embarrassing how much it is. It's like an embarrassment of riches, such that any serious inquirer, once they find out this stuff exists, I think they walk away with no real good reason to believe that the Bible we have today is not a reliable copy of what was originally passed on. That doesn't answer the question, why should I trust it? Well, it answers the question, can I trust it because it's accurate? If it's a forgery or it's nothing like what the original authors wrote, I guess there's no reason to even give it the time of day. But the other part of can I trust it is, okay, so what if it's accurate? And let's even say these people were telling the truth to the best of their ability, that they weren't all just making this stuff up. Why should I give my life to it? Because interesting, I think that's where more people are going to be today. Not to say that there aren't going to be the Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins atheists of the 90s and the 2000s and the 10s that are going to want to have answers to these kinds of questions that we're talking about. But I think a lot of people are going to go to the Bible and their question isn't going to be this. It's just going to be a simple matter of fact. Why should I give my life to the teachings in this book? What do you think about that? Why do you give your life? Why do you trust it in that sense? And what do you think are some good reasons maybe for other people? If I'm not moving it along, and if we want to save that question because we don't want to at the risk of overstating our case. And then, someone who really
No,
is
no.
skeptical minded goes, whoa, you guys oversimplified that. You don't know what the heck you're talking about. And that unravels, any good thing we said, because it sounded like we overstated our case, kind of thing.
No, I think it's a good point to transition to that question. And just to say, again, this is a conversation. So if you are listening to this and you have a question that you'd like to ask, please put it in the comments, so that we can do our best to address it. But I think going to that question of how do we know that what was written is even truthful, and that I think that ties into why I should believe it, because when historians are looking at the question, is this written as a history or as a fantasy? One of the criterions that they use is called the criterion of embarrassment, which is this question: does the text seem to, imagine a fanciful or positive light for everything, or does it include embarrassing details? And if it includes embarrassing details, it seems like the authors are trying to accurately report what actually happened, no matter how embarrassing it is. And when we look at the Gospels, when we look at what they talk about, there's lots of embarrassing details, right? Like the disciples all abandon Jesus, and Jesus is betrayed by one of his top inner circle followers of Judas. Women were the first witnesses to the empty tomb, which is not something that you would invent at that time, at that place, because they were not viewed as reliable eyewitnesses. So there's all sorts of details, and we could go on and on with those. Peter denying Jesus, all sorts of things, and that gives us confidence to know that these are things the authors are trying to just report what actually happened, even if it makes themselves look bad. They're like, yeah, but this happened, and this is how Jesus responded, and that makes me want to trust it. It makes me go, if they were willing to give their lives for this, um, and if they were willing to die for this belief that had risen from the dead, and that this faith was real, and that they were really following the true Messiah, why wouldn't I do the same? Like, why wouldn't I believe what they're saying and follow and obey the teachings of Jesus?
So what about going back to Rogan here? He talks about the impact that Jesus had on this world, and the impact
Mm,
that Jesus had on this world is obviously through his followers and the Bible, the
mm,
teachings of Jesus recorded and then written and dispersed. Rogan calls that a miracle just because of the impact that it had. So there's this recognition, right, that there's something good that came from this. And he wants to use the word miraculous to describe this phenomenon. So this kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier about the fact that Christianity works.
mm.
What, what's the question I want to ask here? Do you guys think it's reasonable to think that the Bible has moral teachings that do just work and Jesus didn't raise from the grave? Do you get what my question is? There's probably a better way to ask
Yeah,
that question.
yeah. No, I
Because
get what
it's
you're
like,
saying. Yeah.
one of the ways, why should I trust this Bible? And you want to say, well, do you see the good that comes from this? Right. Like I was given a talk on the relevancy of the Bible. Is it relevant anymore? And it was to it was a high school. And
Mm,
after the general assembly, I went through some classrooms throughout the day. It's a big school, a lot of kids. And I found myself at one point in the day in a sixth grade class, but it was only girls. And I forget why it was only a girls class. But I asked the question. I said, I bet you guys don't have any drama in your school, do you? And they looked at me like, what the heck? And they had fun with that question. And they wanted to tell me all about it. And so I just responded in true sarcasm form, which doesn't always work great with sixth graders, but I'm a Sherrard and I can't break the habit of sarcasm. And I said, oh, you must all follow the teachings of Jesus then. And they were like, wait, what? And I go, you probably follow the teachings of Jesus, right? Things like turning the other cheek, going the extra mile, considering other people's better than yourself. You probably have all this drama in your school because you're all good followers of Jesus. So when
mm,
it comes, and so it led to a really fun discussion about the value and the goodness of teachings in the
mm,
Bible and Scripture. And so, there's this tendency to want to go, yeah, no, look at what good the Bible has produced.
Hmm.
But do you think the Bible could produce this kind of good if central to its message is a lie or a really big misunderstanding?
Hmm.
Right?
I don't
Because
think so.
the ethic, like even the ethical teachings, this notion of considering other people as better than yourself and living a sacrificial life, that is an ethic that has a straight line to the cross
Hmm.
and the implications of the cross. The
Hmm.
cross in Christianity isn't just that you've had your sins forgiven, it's look how you have been loved. Now go love likewise. If the
Hmm.
creator of the universe, your Lord and Savior, humbled himself to the point of service, suffering a humiliating death on the cross for you, how dare you not treat other people like that? And that
Hmm.
ethic rooted in selfless love is what changed the
Hmm.
Western world, that even atheist historians like Tom Holland will comment on. So I guess my question
Hmm.
is it possible to entertain this idea that this book that changed the world, that's filled with all these good moral teachings, also somehow is just kind of at its core is a lie
Hmm.
or a really big misunderstanding? Jesus really didn't die. He just was resuscitated,
Yeah.
or
In one hand, I want to give a little bit of like possibility to the idea that all truth is God's truth. And so I think that there are some really good moral teachings in other religions, right? So I think there are some good things there, and where other religions get things right, that's great. Um, but I think you're right that it seems strange that Christianity would get so much right, and so much right in ways that are counterintuitive, ways that are countercultural, ways that don't seem to make sense when you first hear them, but when they're actually practiced, like loving your enemies and praying for those who persecute you, things like that, where it's like it doesn't make sense on a human level, where it's like, let me get revenge, let me fight against my enemies. But when you actually see it lived out in the real world, actually it does work. That would
and
be shocking to
dedicate your
me.
life to that teaching when the immediate result of it is death.
Mm,
Because
mm,
it's not
yeah,
like these teachings of
yeah.
Jesus instantly boomed into a flourishing Near Eastern culture, right? It wasn't
True.
like all of a sudden Rome was like, oh, yeah, they're the best people ever. Let's overhaul how we do things. It was like, no, we're going to put you in an auditorium and we're going to let lions eat you alive. So
Yeah.
it's like, how would this teaching endure, right?
Mm,
Because
mm,
it endured in the midst of suffering and persecution. The
yeah.
flourishing that came to Western civilization happened much later over time, not immediately. So it's like, how would the initial followers be like, hey, trust me, let's just stick this out? you know, we came up with all these great ideas. Our leader really didn't come back from the grave, but we thought it'd be great to invent a moral code built on self-sacrifice. And we're going to use this made up story to do it. I know it's not working out for us yet, but trust me, just
Yeah.
hang in there. Literally,
Yeah.
let's just hang in there. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
It's going to be okay. It's like, it's
That's great.
ridiculous. So for me,
Yeah.
it's like, the reliability of scripture, I can't divorce from the historicity of Christianity and this movement starting and enduring
Mm,
doesn't make any sense if there was a literal physical resurrection of Jesus Christ. And if there was, a heck of a lot makes sense of how this thing got started and why it kept going.
I'm slightly forgetting your original question there, Mike, but I think it was something along the lines
So,
of something along the lines of yeah, like, could this have been, could the morality and the teachings have been true if Jesus didn't rise from the dead? I think it's something along those lines. And the reason why I would actually say no is because if Jesus truly just was an ordinary man and wasn't anybody special, then
mm,
let's say then that means that all of those teachings were derived from other humans. So those are human teachings. And when you get human teachings, those teachings those religions tend to do things that favor the well-being of the individual. So you think about Mormonism, right? The end goal of Mormonism is you eventually get to be God of your own planet and be worshipped and be a God. So there's an elevation to deity in
mm,
Mormonism. Think about Islam, and paradise is all about sexual pleasure. That's the goal, is to get to paradise where there's sexual pleasure. There isn't even a guarantee that God is in paradise. So it's not even like their goal is to meet Allah. There isn't even a guarantee that they will ever even meet him. They'll even be there. Jehovah's Witnesses, it's something similar too. It's the 144,000. rule in the heavens with Jesus and God, and then down here on earth is the rest of the people. So that's people in here never actually meet God. So there isn't even like your ultimate goal is just to live in a new earth, but it isn't even to meet God. And then you look at atheism, and the ultimate goal is whatever's best for your survival. So these are all very human things. I want to be divine, sexual pleasure. I want to do whatever's good for me, even at your expense. So I think when humans create their own belief or their own morality or whatever, it's going to be centered about what they think is best for them in that moment and what they're asked for. They want the freedom to do what they want to do. And Christianity is the complete opposite. It's deny yourself the pleasures that you want. It's to sacrifice yourself for the people. It's to love your enemy. Nobody's going to make that junk up because it's not fun. It's going to cost you something, right?
Yeah.
You don't get to indulge in all of the pleasures and things that you want to do. So it's going to cost you. So there's an, and I think that's why, like we were saying earlier, you have got people that say, look, this is too hard. I'm going to do my own thing, regardless of what it is. It could be, I'm going to live with somebody before I get married to them. The Bible says you should, wait till after marriage for sex, but I'm going to live with somebody beforehand. But then you read the studies, and there's multiple that have said that when people live with each other before they get married, they're more likely to get divorced after year one than people who haven't lived together before they're married. And you're like, but this seemed like it made such sense to me to live together because we need to see if it works. We need to try it out. That Bible, that doesn't really understand. It doesn't really get it right. It doesn't know me. And then you do your own thing, and the studies show actually you're more likely to get divorced now because you did that. And so it's like, okay, so maybe it was right. But see, we don't have, in order to be able to come up with a good moral system, you've got to be able to have an element of foreknowledge to know how things are going to play out. Because otherwise, when you come up with your own moral system, you don't know the future, then you're not going to know whether or not that was the right thing. So for example, if I think it's bad to punch somebody. Oh no, it's not even a good example. But just the idea that like, if I don't know whether or not some action I do is necessarily going to be good or going to be bad if I don't have the ability to see 5, 10 years, maybe even 100 years down the road. So I don't think you could make this up without having some sort of being who has a wisdom and a knowledge that is beyond us to be able to tell us things that would not be something that we can necessarily come up with and think ourselves.
Yeah.
Well
a lot
said.
of other moral codes or teachings in some ways it's like, yeah, I can see why this would catch on or stick. I can kind of see why this was created and why people would ascribe to this. And some of those reasons are power, right? You were literally made to do it. Some worldviews and religions grew through power and do this or else. Christianity began in a position where it had no power. It could not force anybody to ascribe to these beliefs. These beliefs were radically not self-oriented. They were selfless. They were other-oriented. They were built on following the example of their leader who suffered a humiliating death.
Yep.
With the hope of everything this guy has been teaching you, it is true because God vindicated this by raising him from the dead. He is who he claimed to be, the Son of God, in whom there is abundant life and forgiveness of sins. Give your life to these teachings and love like he loved you. Mm-hmm. And then a part of the teachings in the New Testament, of course, is that God promised to give us his Spirit that would abide with us, that would help us as we live this life. So the start of Christianity and the impact of these teachings outside of a supernatural factor, I can't make any sense of it. The naturalistic explanations that try to make sense of Christianity, it's like, nah, I don't think you're not accounting for the full, all the facts here. And the inference of the best explanation for the rapid growth of Christianity throughout the world is, I think, a literal bodily resurrection, a supernatural act, and then the presence of God's Spirit within his followers moving forward. So to me, when it comes back to like, why should I trust the Bible? Mm-hmm. I can't get away from the resurrection on this piece and the supernatural assurance that these are good teachings, but the reason they're good teachings is they come from the good Father who made all things and has this kind of foreknowledge and just wisdom. He designed everything. Of course he knows best how things are going to work out for us all.
Yeah.
So follow these teachings. And anyway, so for me, it's like, that's where I get to, is like, I can't, when I'm looking at why should I trust the Bible, I can't get too far removed from the resurrection and the origin of Christianity. And to me, the best explanation for it is something really miraculous and supernatural.
Anna says, Mike be preaching. And I totally agree. Good, thank you for that. I just got to say, too, it's funny. I was at my men's group earlier tonight, and my friend Tyler was leading the discussion, and we were talking about the golden rule, Matthew 7:12, I believe it is. And it's we had this great discussion about, how a lot of other religions have these negative commands where it's like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And how Christianity, sure, has some of those negative prohibitions as well, but it also has these positive statements. And even, other religions have had, I think it was Confucianism, had this kind of don't do to others what you wouldn't have them do to you kind of mentality. But Christianity has this positive kind of statement of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And Jesus says, this is the law and the prophets. So he summarizes the entire moral code of Christianity in this others-centered mentality and others-centered action to love others. And I think you're right, Mike, that Christianity has to be true in order for that to be good, because this idea of Jesus does that for us. Like he does unto us as we would have us do unto him. And he doesn't just put himself in our shoes, he takes on human flesh. And he becomes one of us. And so the truth of Christianity, I think, is just tied in with the ethics of Christianity in a really, really powerful way. And I think you're right that the resurrection, the evidence for the resurrection, bolsters our confidence in the confidence in the Bible as well, which I love. The historical evidence for the resurrection. It's one of my favorite topics. We have a lot of articles on our website, apologetics.org, that talk about the historical evidence for the resurrection. So if you're curious for more of that, that would be a good place to find that. I've got a couple questions coming in here. One is, what is on Pastor Mike's coffee mug? It looks evil.
How can you see that just from this side? Is that?
Yeah.
Oh, it does kind of. So fun. That's so funny. I was just thinking about, I'm going to bring up this mug at the end.
Oh,
if Matthew or Alycia don't ask me a question about it. So
I didn't even know. I wouldn't have asked you.
So I actually went to church with this mug Sunday. Let's see. It'll zoom in eventually, I think. Let's see here. No. I got to get my face out of it.
There it goes. There it goes.
So that's Darth Maul. So that side's not so bad. But I was sitting next to my oldest son, Aaron, and at one point he taps me on the shoulder and he just goes, "What is that?" And it's got this. So I'm sitting in church with this on my mug. And I was like, that's probably not the best coffee mug to bring to church. That's just Darth Maul, Star Wars. Sorry, I'm a nerd, whatever.
Oh, is that what that is? I didn't know.
I love that.
He's a Sith Lord, Alycia.
Movie villains ever. Yeah.
He is. And best in the Clone Wars, the cartoon series. The character of Darth Maul in those is deep, insightful.
Multifaceted. Yeah.
Yes, it's great. Not anything like Phantom Menace. He doesn't even talk, right? So sorry, back on point here.
Only 2 lines. Another question here from Josh asks, what about other religions that have people following them, but are willing to die for those religions? And I'll take a stab at this one, which is it's a great question, Josh. Thank you for that. And it's true that there are people that are willing to die for their religions, other religions. You got suicide bombers. You've got all sorts of people that are willing to do that. But the Christianity is different for 2 reasons. And the disciples, the apostles that saw Jesus risen from the dead, it's different for 2 reasons. One is the disciples were in a unique position of knowing whether they had seen Jesus risen from the dead. They weren't dying in the hope that they would receive a reward in the afterlife, or in the hope that their religion was true, or in the hope that they would get some sort of reward for their actions. No, they had literally seen Jesus risen from the dead, and they were so willing to they were so confident in that belief that they were willing to die for it. And so that is a very significant difference between the people who are willing to die for their religions today. I think the other thing that that shows is that they couldn't have been lying about this belief that Jesus had risen from the dead. Because some people will say, oh, the disciples just made this up, or they wanted their religion to go on, or, they stole the body or something like this. But that doesn't make any sense of the data, because no one's willing to die for something that they know is a lie. No one's willing to,
if they don't have anything
especially
to gain
die.
from it.
Yeah, especially if they don't have anything to gain from it. But even if they have something to gain from it, they're still not going to die for it. Like in the last moments, you're going to be like, actually, wait, guys, I'll recant. Like, give me a way out of being crucified, or all sorts of terrible ways to die. So, and the disciples had nothing to gain from it, right? They had everything to lose, and the Gospels and the Book of Acts describe how they're just persecuted for their belief that Jesus is Lord, and that they're preaching that he was risen from the dead. So, yeah, thank you for that question. But I think the willingness of the disciples to die is one of the most amazing facts that we have about the early church, and the fact that this gives us more confidence in the resurrection and in the Bible as a whole.
Yeah,
Great
that's
question.
good. That's well said. I mean, it's true that people are willing to die for something they believe to be true, especially if they think that this belief benefits them. So the question that we have to ask, right, you made a point, the difference between the first followers of Jesus, why were they willing to die for something if it was not true? And
Yep.
they would have known that. Why would they have been willing to do that? So that's the big difference there. Good job.
And we're definitely not saying that just because Christians are willing to die for Christianity, that it automatically means it's true. We're not saying that that's proof that Christianity is true. We're just simply saying that that shows that they truly believe that it was true. So that's why people in those beliefs also will die for what they, believe is true. So it's not necessarily the idea that if you're willing to die for it, it must be true. We definitely think that there needs to be more than that. But it does show that the people early on who were either visually saw Jesus, or talked to his disciples, or knew his disciples, or heard a lot of those early teachings, believed that it was true because they walked with him, or they were friends. They learned about him through other people, whatever it is, they believed it's true. And that's what it shows, that early on people believed it's true. Doesn't necessarily mean it is. And that's why you got to look at some of the other things to show that it is, whether it's trustworthiness of the Bible, or resurrection, and things like that.
Well, maybe I'm not tracking with you there. I think it's overwhelmingly good reasons to believe in Christianity if the first followers who would have known otherwise. So maybe I'm not fully following.
No, I do think that's evidence, but I'm just saying the principle that somebody's willing to die for something doesn't necessarily guarantee it, is what I'm trying to get at.
But it's different if the first followers who knew one way or the other, either Jesus really did come back from life or he didn't. If Jesus didn't, and they made up that lie and they were willing to give their life for it, I mean, that doesn't make any sense. So it's like people whom we're talking about, not just generally people that believe something to be true. We're talking about the original source of these beliefs. That's a game changer for me. Because, the general principle, people are willing to give their life for something that they believe to be true. But what's different about the apostles is they would have known it's not true. So it doesn't make any sense why they would give their life for it. No one would give their life in that setting for something they know to be a lie, especially the apostles who, unless they didn't believe in Judaism either, but we know the first followers of Jesus were devout Jews, they would have known making this up would damn them to hell. So it's like they literally have everything to lose in this life and beyond. Why would they make any of this up? So maybe we're saying the same thing.
I would agree with you on that. So maybe I should be clear on that. I do think Christianity offers something unique because you have these were eyewitnesses. I guess I was thinking, past the disciples, past the apostles, people later on. And, and the advantage that the apostles had is that, or anybody within the first few generations is they could know, like, look, you're saying this happened 30 years ago. Well, I was alive. So how could that have happened? Or yes, it did happen, you know? So it's like, I remember when Princess Diana died, you know? So if somebody was to write a book 10 years from now saying she didn't die, you're not going to convince me she didn't die. Because I remember staying up all hours of the night, watching it all and hearing the stories of how the surgeons tried to save her and everything like that. So when you're alive, when you're close to the event, you gain much more credibility. So you're absolutely right, Mike. I would agree with that, because you have the ability to say, yeah, that's true, or no, it's not true, versus the further you are, the harder it is to do that.
There's a great comment here from Pinjamin, which says one might die for a lie, but not for what they know is a lie. So, and I think another way to say that is you might be mistaken, but you're not going to die for something that you know is a lie. So, really great way of clarifying that.
Yep.
It's good.
And I don't think the disciples would have been mistaken about Jesus. Like, you'll hear sometimes maybe Jesus survived the resurrection and then he came back. And it's like, come on now. People in the first century weren't idiots. They wouldn't see Jesus hobbling back to them with pierced feet after being in a tomb, dehydrated, and being like, oh, you have come back to life. You are the son of... It's like, no, wow, he survived the resurrection. I mean, he survived the crucifixion. They would have known the difference. It's like, no, they didn't. They did not mistake this. This was not... They didn't get it wrong here. They could have lied, but again, it just doesn't make sense. The lie doesn't make any sense here, especially for someone like Paul. But that we're really getting... I know we got to cut this night short because of Matthew's feeble condition. But so I don't want to make you laugh. You can't laugh right now. So there's a lot more that we could say here. But yeah, the conversion of Paul outside of a literal physical bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ doesn't make any sense to me either. But anyway.
Well, and we knew Jesus died. I mean, when you take a sword and you pierce it and out comes blood and water, that means that they pierced the pericardial sac. So they pierced the fluid around the heart. You pierce that sac, you're dead. So that's why, when people, say, well, he didn't die. I mean, to me, like, the text says things that lets us know clearly that he was dead. And even still, he wouldn't have just gotten up and walked around a couple of days later like everything is good. I mean, Matthew's been struggling with pneumonia. He's not just getting up and going and doing sports and running around. And, like, you don't just get up and everything is fine after something like that. So he would have been a hot mess.
Yeah. Well, guys, I'm convinced. I think the Bible is trustworthy. And I want to, maybe as we conclude here, just why don't we each give one resource that people could look into this further on why to trust the Bible. So I can start off here. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, let me go because I want to give something real brief here. Because
go for it.
I can actually be brief on things. Not when I get in preaching mode, Anna, I guess. Prove it. I'm already longer than I should be just through all this nonsense. But as I think that a lot more people now are opening up the Bible again. Bible sales are up 22%. And they're kind of moving past or setting to it aside, at least for a minute, that is this reliable in the way that we've talked about it. And they're just like, what's going on here? I just want to give a bit of advice on how to read the Bible. One of the things Jesus had said all the time to the Pharisees was, have you not read? And the questions they were often asking were a clear indication that they haven't actually seriously read any of it. So one of the things that's important with the Bible is that you should never read a verse. You have to read the Bible in good portions. The Bible does a pretty good job of explaining itself. It doesn't always. And there's going to be times where questions emerge. And that's why resources like our organization or your pastor, there's commentaries, there's a lot of resources out there that can help you. But the Bible does answer a lot on its very own if you just read it long enough, especially like the New Testament. A lot of Paul's letters, they're like 1,500 words. It's like you writing essays in school that are longer than that. And a letter that is, put together in this way, it's not meant to be read like compartmentalized or just a verse here. And then what does that mean? And then, oh my gosh, can you believe, just read the whole thing. Don't get sucked into worrying about all the details. Just read it like you would read anything else and learn to read the Bible in bigger portions. And that literary context often will answer a lot of the questions that you have. for some of the questions that emerge that aren't just answered by reading more of it, that's when you can turn to some resources to help that maybe we can point to. But especially if you're going to be reading like in the Old Testament, the historical context is going to be very foreign. And a lot of the misunderstanding of the Old Testament just comes from not understanding the ancient Near East. Like, why would God do certain things with a nation that he is forming for a specific purpose? Why would he give them certain laws? Why would he do all of that? I mean, that's a lot of that. You're going to get, you can get some of that answer just by reading in the context. You can get a sense of why God is doing this, but a lot of it might seem it's going to be hard to figure out because it's an ancient text. It's an ancient culture, and you're not going to know a lot of that. And to move into my book that I would recommend and land the plane really quick, I think Is God a Moral Monster? Fantastic book. And it's been a popular book. I think it's going to become more popular now than it even has been in years past. And if you've not read this book, read this book. It's going to help you with a lot of the challenges you have, particularly when it comes to the Old Testament. Did my screen just flip? What the heck? Oh, you do that, Matthew?
I flipped it so they can read
it. That's way to go. Now
I didn't even notice. That's crazy. I thought he switched hands. That's crazy.
That's like a magician there. Yeah. That's what I did. Yeah. Now I'm just so distracted by this. I don't know what I was saying. Anyways,
all right, I'll flip it back.
All right. Is God a Moral Monster by Paul Copan is a fantastic book, and it will help you understand a lot about the Old Testament context, the Near Ancient East, or the Ancient Near East, excuse me. And it will help you with some of that historical context that you need for some of the problematic passages and stories in the Old Testament. But big rule of thumb, you want to understand the Bible, just read more of it in one sitting at a time, and the Bible will answer a lot of the questions that you might have on its own.
And on that recommendation, he also has a newer book called Is God a Vindictive Bully, which is sort of a sequel and expansion and further on this kind of question, dealing with a lot of Old Testament challenges, but he helps to give a lot of context for how to read the Bible and stuff like that too. So yeah, I'll give my recommendation, which we've already been giving lots of shout outs and props to our boy Wesley Huff tonight, but I'm actually friends with him. So
aren't
I don't
you
know
cool?
about you guys, but I'm only 1 degree separation from Joe Rogan, so it's pretty cool. But
Matthew, I find my value in who I am, which is a man made in the image of God, not in the people that I know.
You can just
so I'm glad that
clearly,
makes you feel better about yourself.
Say that you don't. You can just say that you don't know anybody, Mike. That's It's okay. It's okay that you don't know. That's cool. Apologetics Canada is Wes's website, and he has an awesome video series called "Can I Trust the Bible?" And he goes to Egypt, he goes all over. It's fantastic. So check that out if you want a really good overview of why to trust the Bible.
I guess book recommendation would be "Can We Trust the Gospels?" Peter J. Williams. I like Peter J. Williams, cool guy. So that would be a good one. And then,
do you know Peter J. Williams? Are you going to name drop here too, Alycia?
I mean, I've met him, but that doesn't matter. But if you want something, when going off of what Mike was saying, if reading the Bible is really about understanding that you've got to read it in its culture and in its context. And so I'm a big fan of a guy named Ken Bailey, who was an American who was a professor in the Middle East for 40 some odd years. And one of the things he learned is that Middle Eastern culture doesn't change. And so he shares, here's how Middle Easterners today understand these biblical stories, specifically the New Testament and the Gospels. And he helps bring a lot of cultural perspective that we in the Western world miss. We think very individualistically. They think very communally. They think very honor, shame focus. And so that will really help you to understand a lot of the New Testament, the gospel, certain gospel stories, and even Paul as well. So, Ken Bailey, he wrote Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes. I forget the names of the other ones, but if you look up Kenneth Bailey, you'll find it. Ken Bailey.
And this is a way we're glad to help moving forward. I mean, as you're digging into some of these questions, just shoot us an email, information@apologetics.org, or through one of our social media channels, and just say, hey, I'm really struggling with this. The books you recommended it's not really kind of what just ask us, and we're happy to back and forth with you through email, social media, stuff like that, and point you to some really good stuff. That's the good news of the day in which we live. There's an abundance of resources, which can be intimidating. It's like, where do I start? But that's one of the things that we can do is help curate some of these for you.
Yeah, and we have this question: are those good resources for students? And
Yeah.
I think absolutely. I would just add Case for Christ is another fantastic resource, one that deals with the reliability of the Bible, but also the case for the resurrection as well, which, as we've said, ties into this case for the Bible.
And I
So
think
that's excellent.
I think Jonathan Morrow, who I know, has a
Yeah.
maybe a little bit more youth accessible book called Questioning the Bible. It's shorter.
Nice.
It's academically rigorous, but I think it's a little bit maybe more reachable for a student. And I've got Josh, I got that book on my shelf if you just want to borrow it. So that's who asked the question, I think, or maybe Jen asked the question.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, everyone, and thank you for your questions. And we do this once a month, so Ask an Apologist is a regular live stream, and it's also in podcast form now. So if you'd like to subscribe to the podcast and listen to it that way as well, we would love to have your participation there. So thank you, and feel free to share this stream after it's done with anyone that you think might find it helpful. And we will see you next time.